Welcome aboard, my name is Sharia, and you're listening to a brand new episode of the Aviation Files. Last episode, we left off on part 1 of my interview with Mr. Huot, where we talked about his life and his journey, how aviation design has changed over the decades, and some specific liveries we thought were of interest. If you haven't seen part 1, I recommend it, but either way, the conversation should be insightful. Part 1 ended with me and Edmond discussing our thoughts on the KLM Orange Pride livery. Now, before we start, I would like to thank our sponsors for today's episode, Lithium Containment Solutions. Lithium Containment Solutions is a pioneering company in lithium-ion battery fire containment, as well as safe charging and storage. With innovative technology, they are the best choice to equip airliners with the safest measures for lithium battery fire containment. Their product, Lithium FireGuard, is the only product currently on the market with the prestigious UL 5800 certification. They offer devices that apply universally, as well as custom-made devices. They're making substantial changes not just to aviation, but maritime safety, government buildings, and even office buildings. To learn more, visit their website, lithcon.us, and check out episode 30 of the Aviation Files, where I interviewed Nick Dunbar, their VP of Sales. Once again, a big thank you to Lithium Containment Solutions. Now, let's get back to the interview.
Yeah, I don't know, but to your point about the orange and the blue, I definitely didn't get that. What do you think about the Condor livery?
Like the stripes, the towels.
The candy wrapper.
It's interesting. I like how they wanted to they brought it out summer of, I think, 2022, but it was to promote summer travel. It's a leisure airline to Germany or from Germany to other places. And I think they got the message across with the towel and the beach vibes, but I think they could have done a little more. Just the stripe sort of gets lost, and it's the meaning gets lost. So I like their idea behind it. I think it could have been executed better, but I don't mind it. But I think the pastel, the colors are not vibrant, they're sort of pasteled, and I don't like pastel colors in general, but that's a me thing. That's not, I'm sure there are other people who disagree. So
I would tend to agree with what you're saying, and it's a highly effective PR move, and in the airline business, that's a big part of it. So it's got a lot of play. B, it is a leisure travel airline, so it's in keeping with the spirit of leisure. Yeah, love it. C, the stripe is an interesting device. It's universally understood, like striping. Yeah. I think my issue with it is they were a little bit too literal with the stripe. And maybe that's part of the strategy was we're literally going to do an entire stripe. We're going to stripe the whole plane. And so they did. I'm wondering if they could have, and I would love to open up the vault in the studio who did the work to see okay, can I see what you guys also presented? Because I'd like to see versions of the striping that maybe had more of an angular nature. I find that the striping is so vertical, it's incongruous to the idea of movement and ascension and flight.
It's great that you mentioned that, because now that I'm thinking about it, I wish they put wrinkles in the towel, or really made it seem like a towel, not just the design of a towel. You know what I'm saying? If there were wrinkles or folds or something, it would have elevated the design and really sent the message.
Yeah. Well, look what British Airways did with Union Jack, where they gave it a bit of a ripple based on that was a version of that. But I just feel like they, and so in that regard, from a graphics perspective, I had a bit of a problem with that. So I don't know, but it came to mind. Hey, I have another livery for you that I want to get your thoughts on. From a before and now, or previous livery to where they are now. Air Canada's previous livery using the mint
green to the current one with the I've talked to some other av geeks about this, and they disagree with me. I like the new one. I didn't like the mint green, but there's a lot of people who will tell me oh, that's not right. That's not the correct opinion. But
that won't be me.
Yeah.
I never liked it from the day it rolled out, and and I didn't like the off-register dot pattern for the maple leaf. I thought that was too trendy, and from a distance didn't read that well. I certainly didn't like the color, because it's an odd color on the tarmac. And when you're a national airline, you got to take a stand and you've got to be absolute about your choices. It's part of the esteem of the national carrier. And I call that livery the tube of toothpaste. It felt really ugh. So
Yeah.
when I saw what Wing Creative did for the new livery, I was like, wow, did they get it? The colors are esteemed. They're not trying so hard, and yet there's all types of surprising, interesting marks and placements, like the maple leaf on the side sits lower. Like, they have the maple leaf on the tail, obviously, but then they take that mark and they play with it in terms of placement and positioning. They give the cockpit window the mask, which of course is, a bias.
Yeah.
but like everything was done so well. The interior was done nicely. The livery is just strategically more on regional opinion. And it shows you that you don't have to try to be everything. Like sometimes I think airlines think that they have to try so hard. And in some cases maybe, but a national carrier like Lufthansa, it's about the measured steps, not the, I'm going to reinvent this all and just blow you all away with something so different. No. And maybe this is the Air India debate is, did something really interesting? Like, I can't help but wonder if Air India went to Landor and some junior team is like, oh my God, another livery. What are we doing today? Like, not passionate about air and design. Literally threw out stuff that people like you and I would be like, whoa, wait a minute. Right? And then it's like, so, I don't know. There's a lot going on there, but especially for a national carrier, I think that's just like, okay, really step carefully and make sure your designs are reflective of like a greater calling, not just trendy sort of like, oh, it's arbitrary but cool. No.
Yeah, I think as a national carrier, you do have an extra responsibility to uphold an image. Whereas if you're like not a national carrier, you have a little room to play around. Yeah. So, there's pros and cons to both sides. That's for sure.
Absolutely. For
sure. Yeah. No, I like Air Canada's new livery. I won't say it's my favorite. I prefer others, but it is much better than like you said, the toothpaste. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know if they're my favorite livery either, but I'm Canadian, so of course I'm proud that they've got this now. And I always tell people, and half the people I tell, like, why are we talking about this?
No, I can totally see why we're talking about this. It's something that needs to be discussed. It was a rare example of something like that happening. And
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember. This is sort of like way back in the day, but we used to have an airline called CP Air.
I probably wouldn't remember.
You wouldn't remember it. It became Canadian Airlines, which then was sort of the two mainline carriers, Air Canada and Canadian, and then Canadian disappeared. But CP Air, if you Google it,
let me look at it.
Wild. First of all, they used the color orange and red. That's a daring color combination.
Oh wow! This is It reminds me of Braniff, but done better.
Yeah, like it's. I remember at the time, like, my age, of course, like I was a kid and I remember seeing these planes in the tarmac and they just popped, but the color was so bold. And the marking was Canadian Pacific, which was on railways, hotels. I mean, that marking was everywhere. But it was that graduating stripe, which to me was all about, taking off.
And the peak of chrome on like...
Yes.
I love chrome. I will say I love chrome.
Yeah. It was a great... So, I sometimes reference good old CP Air. It's like, man, like, they don't do those liveries anymore.
I will say I don't like that circle with the triangle on the tail. That's a interesting choice for me. I wouldn't go with that.
Yeah, and again, I think that was sort of a mark that they had to work with. It wasn't just for the airline; it was for rail, for shipping. Like,
I see. Yeah,
I feel like that mark was used in a lot of applications. So I don't know if they were given that, or I don't know.
Okay, yeah, they might have been given that. In which case, you just got to work with what you have.
But and it's obviously long gone. But it's noteworthy. So
it is for sure. Well, now that we've talked about current aviation design, How do you think aviation design will change in the upcoming years, especially with the onset of supersonic travel and passengers being on the aircraft for like a shorter amount of time, since our aircraft are only getting faster, more efficient?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's sort of uncharted territory in a way, which is kind of what makes it exciting. As I referenced before, some of our clients are grappling with things like eVTOL, in terms of, like, we have a client that was doing seaplane service, and they were looking at possibly updating their fleet with electric aircraft. Like, I think Archer was making this really cool eVTOL aircraft. So we were doing a little bit of work exploring what that could look like. We were working on investor decks where we were taking concepts and bringing them to life to see if we could help them get funding. So it's sort of interesting. But just what that travel experience looked like to people, where you're flying sort of, from high density to high density, sub-regional, what your needs would be. So that was one sort of world that I would sort of, I don't know it as well, but it's sort of new territory, and I'm very interested in it. Supersonic is another one that I think, back to the idea around promotion and PR.
Yeah.
The idea of supersonic is something that airlines are using to leverage PR, but are not necessarily practically and realistically prepared to play in. Like United's partnership with Boom. Super cool. Go to their website. The whole thing is, I think, designed around exciting you about, the possibilities of supersonic. It's sexy, honestly. But United Airlines investing in supersonic seems so odd to me.
I did not expect them to be the first. I was like, interesting.
And I don't know. But my hunch is that they put some money down, like a letter of intent or something, so that they could express interest in possibly. I mean, airlines do that all the time. They form an LOI, do an LOI, they put some money down, but it's just really a way for them to hedge their bet. It's not necessary, but then they get to go to the market and talk and about what they're planning on doing, and then it influences people's perception. And I think that's a strategy, and it's good for United. And they may do it, but I don't know if the economics of supersonic are necessarily where they need to be. I don't know. I've heard that it's an expensive proposition. But then perhaps to your point, based on just the world getting smaller and smaller and more people, the idea of having to get money to be faster, maybe, that market will find itself. And then we will be talking supersonic, which is, again, it's looking at the past and bringing it into the future, because Concorde was an era, like an iconic moment in time. I almost got to fly on it. I didn't. I worked for Air Canada, and I traveled on discounts, and I was going to buy an ID90, which would have meant that I would have spent, it would have cost me $800 to fly there and back. One way, like, I would have flown on the Concorde one direction, flew 747 out, and then flew back with them. Anyways, I didn't do it. I just thought, I'll get around to it.
Yeah.
But the idea of, like, confined travel in in a piece of equipment that's going to fly way higher sort of begs the question, how do you provide an experience for people where the physicality of that that jet is going to be challenged in different ways, like the windows would be smaller, or do they have innovations that allow for greater windows? Or I'm sure you've seen all types of fantasy concepts where imagine an entire glass plane, or the whole plane
is made of glass, but that's not possible right now.
No, and I think there's a role for fantasy and imagination, both in terms of getting people excited, both in terms of planting seeds, which then find their way into a practical zone. But But yeah, I don't know exactly how this, like what the next step is going to be.
Yeah.
In terms of the feasibility of it.
And I don't think anybody does, because when the Concorde came out, I'm not sure, but I think people would have expected a change, but we didn't really see a change. Airlines just kind of put in their current livery, their current seating, and I think they made it more spacious, the seating, but I'm not sure. But, so we didn't see a change with the Concorde, and is that going to translate to modern supersonic planes, or is that just something for the Concorde, and when now we see it, it's going to change how we, see the passenger experience?
It makes me wonder about, okay, so back in the day, governments were very much involved in the funding, the R&D.
Right.
And now you have, like, governments are challenged in every way. And what you have is these billionaires, the Elon Musks of the world, who are basically spearheading, SpaceX. And so, one would hope, and if anyone, Elon Musk is somebody with an imagination. He is a bold thinker. Love him or hate him. He has, he has carved out a niche in this world for doing things differently, and so very interested to think, what would someone like him do when it comes to transport in the air? I mean, he certainly figured out Tesla, and he's figured out solar, and he's got space thing. So I think it'll depend on somebody who's going to sort of champion the idea that's going to be personal to them, and they're going to use their enormous wealth to help fund things that governments just can't do efficiently or at all.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's going to be a combination of governments. I would love government to get back involved in things, because I think there's a rational sensibility to government. I know government is often canned as being inefficient and bloated, but a modern approach to government that works in combination with the private sector to help bring innovation back to people like Concorde did, I would love to see that. I don't know how it's going to happen, but and I would love to do a livery on a supersonic jet. That would be obviously like a very sexy project.
Of course, yeah.
Not happening yet, but
one day.
You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we actually spoke to my business partner Peter. Spoke to somebody at Booth Supersonic just about what I was up to or what we are doing in terms of our livery design. But I think he was talking to them more from a PR perspective, so I don't know where that conversation went. But, we are always open to these ideas. We're reaching out where we can to start conversations. Who knows where those conversations will go. And I'd love to be having this conversation with you again, only to be saying I actually got to work on a supersonic jet.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you get a chance, please let me know. I would love to talk to you about it.
I will. I've been really enjoying my conversation, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Sure how it would go or what we talked about, but I always love talking with people who love airplanes and fellow av geeks,
Yeah.
Never a shortage of thoughts, opinions, points of view. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, of course. Speaking of, airplanes and loving airplanes, one of the airlines that I love is Singapore Airlines, and I heard that you worked for them or worked with them. And could you just share a little bit about what you contributed there, and how was the overall experience of working there? Because I've heard working for them is great.
Yeah, we did. So the project we did for Singapore Airlines was not a livery or it was advertising. So we did a digital design project for them. It was a small project, but it was involving like tourism, and so we did a whole design palette that was a digital expression that was working in combination with Toronto. So it was like a cross promo.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, nothing to do with the airline direct, but it was involving the airline, and so. But I would love to work on a project with them. That's another airline I'm a big fan of as well.
Yeah. No, Singapore Airlines livery is not like, it's not the best, but I do like what they've done with it. And the interiors and their passenger experience, I just think it's great.
Well, they do the stripes, which I'm a big fan of, which I think they do a good job of. The livery you're right. The livery, it's all good things, but they're not all best. Like, they're not all the best they can be. Yeah. You know what the best thing about Singapore is their business class seats. I don't know if you've seen them. They're like super spacious.
Yeah, I've seen them, yeah.
They're so sexy. They're like some of the sexiest seats I've seen on an aircraft. They look comfortable. They look big. They've got character. So yeah, that's my comment on Singapore. But yeah, and I don't think I've ever flown them. No, I've flown Thai, but not Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got a fairly big fleet too, and they do some crazy long runs. I think they had a flight out of Newark.
Yeah, no, they do. Some of their flights are just insanely long.
Yeah,
I think they're like on par with Air New Zealand and Qantas. They're just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of beautiful interior design, Qantas I think gets top marks. They use a lot of their design comes from Mark Houston.
Mm-hmm.
So he's basically touched all aspects of the experience in terms of lounge, in-flight, whatnot. But pretty soft. And the livery, again, it's pretty simple, and yet it's iconic.
Mm-hmm.
They've owned those color combinations, and the kangaroo icon is singularly Qantas. Like,
yeah.
So yeah, I definitely love all of what they're doing. And can't wait to see what they do next. Like, I think the airline is doing great. I think they're in great shape. Like,
they are, yeah.
So
they're set up for like another growth expand. Like, they had a huge one before, I forget when, but they're set up for more growth. Like, they're doing great.
Yeah, no, and I would love to fly them. I haven't flown Qantas, but
yeah.
Experience. So.
Now, since we talked about stripes, another airline that comes to mind that did stripes really well is Air China. I think they did stripes really well with partitioning the gray bottom and the white top and their red logo. Like, I don't know. What do you think about their livery?
Is the underbelly a different color?
Yeah, the underbelly is a darker gray. I can see how it's hard to tell, and I wish they emphasize a little more, but...
Yeah, they're okay.
That's what I hear. It's funny, that's what I hear from a lot of people. It's like, it's okay. But, like, I like to rave about it. I think it's one of the... It's simplistic, but it still has that resemblance of the retro, but it's also, like, modern.
Yeah.
And it has the Chinese lettering. I like that too. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, I am too. Like, because it's there's a visual tension in terms of just like, okay, letter forms that are English, and then it's the Chinese, and it's like I like some of that tension.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I would like to see I'm trying to think about, like, if it was my job, like, okay, we got to reinvent this. What would I do differently? I probably would bring that marking on the back. It looks like a bird.
I think it's a phoenix. I'm not sure, but I think so.
I would bring that to life a little more.
Me too. Yeah.
I would explore. I definitely would be showing with only internal options for, like, a bolder use of that icon, and maybe even interpret that motif from a patterning perspective, and then use that patterning very sparingly in some application on other parts of the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to your point about the striping, you kind of don't want to lose that, right? Like, that's kind of their thing, right? Like the fresh color and the striping. So I think what I would do is I would play with the weighting of the stripes. That's what I would do. I would keep the stripes, and I would very carefully try to figure out, is there a way that I could, like, just alter the relationship between the thin and the thick stripe, like
Ever so slightly.
ever so slightly.
Yeah.
Could I bring it down a little bit, like lower? Could I bring it up? Like that's what I would be looking to do, because otherwise, I don't know. Like you're playing with fire if you start to completely change it all. But
Yeah.
yeah. But there, and I think it's a reflection of the conservative nature of the country.
Yeah, it is, for sure.
So it's like when in Rome, you've got to play within the sandbox that you've been given. So you can't. And I
think
that.
they did it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think the engine could have had a little bit of something?
I think they should have, for sure. Yeah. There should have been some resemblance of either that phoenix or like the stripe or something.
The little square flag or something.
Yeah, actually, I was going to bring that up. That's my only pet peeve with this design, is that they just put the flag there in the front, and it stands out so much, and I don't like it.
Oh, yeah. See, I like that it pops. Like, I like that it actually, there's a little bit of, tension there. But I just don't know why they put it right. I think
it must have been, a requirement, because even on their previous liveries, they had a flag, almost right there, so I think it was just something they had to deal with.
It's not owning its place. Everything
it's
on
not.
That, it's sort of it feels like it's just randomly placed. Look at the spacing on either side of it. I would have brought Air China closer to the flag, and then taken the flag and Air China type together and moved it a little closer to the door. I would have owned, as opposed to it. It's like the lettering is just okay, we have all that space. Let's just put stuff there. It just feels very indiscriminate. I don't know.
Yeah. It's like how the Star Alliance logos on these airlines, they just put it there, but at least they put it near the window. It has a spot. So this sort of feels remnant of that, but even worse than just the Star Alliance logo.
I like the Star Alliance.
I love the star and the way it's 3D.
Yeah. And I love that little marking because it's small and it's one.
But it's noticeable. You can tell.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's subtle because it's gray. That was designed by Pentagram, actually, which is one of the most prestigious design firms in the world. And I remember in my earlier years being obsessed with they did the rebrand for Star Alliance. And I remember looking at the work going, oh my God, I love all of this. And then they showed that little marking on the plane. And I was like, oh man. Jeez. So, yeah. And sometimes when I'm showing clients new designs, I put the Star Alliance on it. Even if they don't have
if they're not part of it, yeah.
It's like, you should be. And they're like, okay, take it off because we're not. Oh, okay, just say it.
Yeah, no, I probably would do this. I love Star Alliance. Everything about them is just great.
Yeah, the name is sexy. The One World, not so nice.
One World it pisses me off. That blue circle, but it's they made it 3D. Why?
I remember I had not a fight, but I had it was I want to do the Star Alliance. And we're not Star Alliance, we're One World. And I'm like, yeah, but Star Alliance is so much nicer. We can't. We're one.
Yeah, they're not allowed to.
Fine, I it was all internal, but I was trying to make a point. That's all. I obviously was going to put One World on there. But, but I like all those markings, and I think that comes from, in part, the military and sort of the regulatory world that is airlines and aircraft and FAA. That there's lots of
rules,
markings.
Yeah.
And those required markings, it's sort of in Formula One, where there's sort of something quite beautiful about it, where on this giant aircraft with buttons and doors and fixtures, and that there's all these little marking, and I love that part of it as well. Yes, the design has to be singular and it has to be bold and balanced and all those things. But then when you get really close, I like all the little things that have to be included. Empress of China, or whatever they name the plane, or where the Star Alliance logo goes, together in its entirety.
Yeah.
I think that's what is also quite exciting about people who like to travel, especially athletes. They like to see all those things.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Weird, but yeah.
No, and I collect airplane models, and when you see those markings on the models, it just takes it to another level. It makes you happier.
Yeah,
It's yeah. I like it. I like the markings, and it's not just the main design. It's other things too, and that's great. In Air France's like tail design, they have the little EU star on the back, and I think that's beautiful. Like that's a nice touch.
Yeah, I mean the U.S. flag on if you Google Northwest Orient, which is one of my top favorites, they had the red flag on the tail, and in the slanted version of it, it's like,
oh yeah,
so sexy, and just a red tail.
Yeah,
Like,
and you could tell that
modern.
if you see that at an airport, you're gonna know that is Northwest Orient.
Exactly. Like I remember as a kid, like everything about Northwest Orient, typography, the name Northwest Orient, which of course politically they changed that, but to me that was like a celebration of all things sort of exotic.
Yeah.
Far away. And again, that was the glamour of who I really love is what JAL used to have, the Garden Jet. Back in the late 70s, when the 747 came out, they actually divided all the cabins up into different themes, all based on mechanical, and some of the most beautiful, very simple Japanese, so very conservative, color stories, the graphics, the uniforms, even this little scalloped treatment of the seat napkins, the head napkin. Everything was so like attention to detail. Big fan of JAL, and I still to this day really actually like the very sort of garish. It's not garish. It's this very simple black type on the white aircraft.
Yeah,
it's very utilitarian.
Yeah. No, I think Japanese airlines do it right in most areas. Yeah. Like even their service is like top notch.
Very, very prompt, very efficient, all of those things. Yeah.
You seem to care about typography a lot, and there's something I want to ask you. What do you think about Virgin Atlantic's like typography on the aircraft? Because
Go ahead.
It's I hate it. It's like I hate it. It's so bad.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I do too.
Yeah.
I really do. And first of all, I love the iconic Virgin script, the hand script.
Yeah.
It so does not play well with anything. And yet that is so Branson. Like to me, it's so on brand for them to use that wacky 70s Virgin script. And so in many ways, I've always appreciated when the airline was able to sort of modernize with that in mind. And then they went with this really, like, you can't read it.
Yeah.
It's too thin.
It's so thin. Like
it's too trendy. It's like I don't know. It's like I don't know what font that is. Like Railway, like extra thin or something. It just to me is doesn't have any holding power. Can't read it. It's not legible, and it doesn't have any esteem. And so lettering for me doesn't all have to be thick and bulbous, but there needs to be, I think, holding power to the lettering, especially when that plane, again, as clients always say, it's a billboard. It's like, if you can't read it from afar. So I think there's something to be said about that. But just stylistically, I agree. I'm not a big fan. I love what Virgin has done. I like where the business is going.
I like their gold on the aircraft.
Yeah.
They did that right, that's for sure.
Yeah, let me just look.
It's like sort of chrome, but it's gold, so it has a different effect. It's like a modern retro. I like it.
Yeah. Do you know who I used to fly to Los Angeles, and I flew Virgin America.
Oh.
And I was flying in their first class, and their first class was all white seats. And the lighting was purple. Like it was a party.
Oh, yeah.
And the flight attendants were like, we're going to have some fun. It was like, what is going on? And Peter and I would always book Virgin America. We were always like wanting to, and they had some of the best user experience websites, earliest. They were one of the first airlines to really get behind the user experience, UX, UI on the booking website. At a time when most of the airlines were very much using very clunky UX design.
Yeah.
They were like just the tone of the copy, where are you looking to fly today? As opposed to, what is your destination? So from a branding perspective, I was always impressed by that. But yeah, I just remember thinking like, man, this is like Vegas in the sky. Like it's very different.
Yeah. No, they sort of brought back that like 70s bar at the top of the 747. Like they brought that back in their A330s with, I think it's called the Lounge or something. But
okay.
But yeah, in their A330s they have this purple lit room with a bar, and like it's for business class, first class passengers, something. But
well, they call it upper class, which again is sort of tone deaf to me. Like, why are you calling it upper class? Like that seems a little, but it's so British.
Yeah,
it's so British to be cheeky like that.
It is, yeah.
But again, that's the brand, and so I always think about the brand as like the mood board that you create is like a filter. My job is to create a filter that will only allow approved colors, type, iconography, imagery in. And everything that is not part of that palette does not penetrate the filter. So for Virgin, it's all things sexy, and the colors are all like these really like vivid purples and pinks. And these are not colors that typically in the airline world you see a lot of. I mean, certainly in the States, everything is, and in Europe, it's all very toned down.
It is, yeah.
And so, again, I give Virgin credit for carving out a niche, owning who they are and who they're not. And they've done a fairly good job, except for the thin lettering, which I so agree with you on.
Yeah. Okay, there's one more livery that comes to mind now that I'm thinking about Virgin. They're like sort of gold chrome. There's one other reflective livery that's standing today that I like, and it's actually Aeroflot. I feel like that's dangerous waters, but I like their livery.
Why do I feel like I just looked at that one?
Not their new one, not their white one. They they ruined it, but their current like silver one.
Okay, there's the one that I'm thinking about is the fuselage is like a matte gray, silvery. Yeah,
it's like sort of shimmery, but sort of not. It's like toned down. It's not chrome, but it's toned down.
Yeah, and then the tail has like a sort of a billowing
sort of like BA, like British Airways.
Yeah. What are you thinking?
I just like it. I think it's I like that tail sort of swooshes down into the, back half of the aircraft. I like that gray. It's like sort of shimmery, but it's, it's not like the chrome from the 70s. They show that they are an innovative airline, and, they're trying to move forward, but they're not forgetting who they are and where they come from. And I like the Russian flag. It's wavy. It's sort of like British Airways. And I like that it like comes down to one point and then it sort of just fuses into that little red outline of the blue. Yeah, I think they did it right with that.
I think it's a solid critique. I'm going to add to your critique and say I love the use of orange as a mitigator between the sort of matte chrome, gray, whatever, and the blue. Like these colors work. Like
they do.
That blue, that orange, and then that top half of the plane. Like, what a great way to use the orange. Like, in this sparing, a very sparing approach. It's and then who doesn't love that Russian type? Like, oh man, I love it.
Yeah, I like that they include the little Russian letters there. It's nice.
Yeah, and then they have. I think they have the. It's not Star Alliance. Who's there? Is it One World?
Sky Team.
Sky Team. Again, the lame mark. But I like all those little markings.
Yeah.
The engines are cute. It's sort of a typical blue with a trim, the orange trim. Yeah, it's nice. I like it.
Yeah. I do have to ask though, since neither of us could describe it, what is that matte chrome color?
What is that? I don't know. It's like obviously it's a paint with some type of metallic quality to it. At least that's how it reads. The reason I'm not sure, and I'm also very interested, is because SAS had the same thing going on with their SAS marking. It was like a matte on gloss. It sort of had a shimmer to it, like it popped.
Yeah.
And I was like, first of all, again, from a production point of view, that's a lot of work, because people at these facilities they're not interested in the design. They're like, so you really have to watch them carefully. So anything that's out of the ordinary is easily effed up, So
Yeah.
I think I look at what Aeroflot's doing, and I'm like, okay, there's something going on with that paint, but I don't know. Good question. And it's funny, in different light,
It looks different.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
I love.
If you see it in the sunset, like I flew Aeroflot when I went to Russia back in 2013. But you see it in the sunset, and it's completely different than when you see it in the daytime. It's nice that it morphs, and
Yeah,
I think very few aircraft do that these days. But it's nice to see that.
I would love to know the costing. I would love to understand what investment level that required on behalf of the airline, although it's Aeroflot, so I don't think there's no one's questioning that. But just the economics of painting the entire plane and then using colors that are left of center or not sort of conventional.
Yeah.
It's, to me, always, it's just because I have been forced to reconcile some of those challenges myself, so I have an appreciation for it. But in terms of aesthetics, I think it really works. And like, again, to your point, for the body of the aircraft to take on a slightly different look based on daylight, evening light, like electric light.
Yeah.
I think it's again these little things that are surprising people. Like, that's the whole point, is how is the livery working so that it's in different applications, it's creating sort of a new effects, and that's the thing that people take note of.
Yeah. No, you brought up before when you were talking about your Northern Pacific that like it has to look different from different angles, and I think that like really resonated with me, because a design is not just for one scenario, and it's not just 2D. It has to be a 3D design, and it has to have a different emotion at different times. And I think that's like it goes from a good design to a great design, and I like that you brought that up.
Yeah, no, I mean, you see the airlines doing it, sort of a trend now, but
yeah,
and I think Virgin's sort of doing it right away with the underbelly, where they put the airline, or Etihad, or some of the airlines started doing it. Now all the airlines do it. They paint the name of the logo.
Yeah, Air India did that with their new their rebranding recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
JetBlue has a new livery. Did you see theirs?
I did not, but I heard about it.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a little trendy, but it's quite nice. And it sort of reminds me of that they have the multiple tail designs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who did that first, right?
BA with their I forget what it's called.
World Image.
World Image, yeah.
World Images, World Fins. A huge debacle, but I promote it. Not because it was a failure, but because it represented a bold, ambitious idea. Mm-hmm. And it was ahead of its time. It obviously didn't, it fell out of favor with the consumers. They didn't understand it. But I just give a lot of credit to Landor or the people at Group who were in charge of the design to be like, let's try something different. World Airline, you're one of the only airlines that can make a claim like this. Mm-hmm. But the execution, I understood that it fell flat. Like, it felt like the tail was divorced from the rest of the plane visually. And I think people didn't understand it. But and then I see, airlines like JetBlue who are doing sort of like a version of the multiple tail design. And I'm like, okay, well, somebody else paved the way for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a topic that I have been waiting to talk to someone about, and I think you're the perfect person to talk about this with. But back in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, Western airlines were making their Asian counterparts like, KLM Asia or whatever, because they, political tensions between China and Taiwan, so they had to fly to both countries, all of that. But I think the design influence was great. Look at British Asia Airways' livery. Okay, it feels like British Airways, but it feels like Asia, and I think that was a great fusion. And I want to know how you think like that whole Asia counterpart to Western airlines like really changed how, you know, we saw Western aircraft.
Okay, let me just first of all, British Asia. Okay, they're. Oh my God, what is this?
It's
okay,
like,
so it's British Airways, but the tail.
it has like Chinese characters.
I've never seen this before.
I only learned about it a year ago, but I was fascinated by it, and I thought it was great.
Oh my! So, yeah, like I'm just looking at some of the photos here. First of all, I loved that British Airways livery.
Yeah, the Landor was beautiful.
I loved it. I mean, I think the use of the heraldry, the crown with the sort of the speed mark, I thought was just so beautiful, and I've seen other airlines copy it in different ways, of course, but then you now are introducing on the tail only something that is representative of, what were you saying again? This sort of like this relationship based on is it, and it has to do, I guess, with the politics of the British imperialism in Asia.
So basically what happened was China said, if you're going to fly to our country, you can't fly to Taiwan. And so what countries did was their main carrier would fly to China, but then they made like a sub carrier or like a separate airline that would fly exclusively to Taiwan and back from their main hub.
And that's what this is.
That's what this is. Yeah, British Asia Airways, KLM Asia, you know, they all did this, but
oh, I see.
Yeah, but I like that, like, Western, like, we don't usually see an Asian influence in Western aircraft and liveries, but here it was like British Asia Airways is a great example of this, like, sort of rare fusion between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks very much to the interest that airlines and governments had in promoting routes and opening up access, and yet trying to, and very much forcing Western airlines to commit to certain like non-negotiables. And then you see the airlines were like, let's figure this out. Like it's sort of interesting when you see the livery. It's like it sort of works, but it's clearly not the right symbol. But
yeah,
it makes me think about a bunch of guys in the boardroom going, here, but this, like, quite simply slap on the because it's required. It sort of reflects just the brutality of the regulatory environment when two countries are like, non-negotiable in certain ways. It's like, okay, well, we'll just do this. And it was a moment in time, because now you don't see any of this.
Yeah, like, you don't. Yeah. If you look at KLM Asia, it just says KLM and then Asia under it. Like, it's not much of a change.
Yeah, they're not asking the airline to be as promotional or sort of visual about their marking. Whereas in this example that you've cited, it's like the tail is everything. Like the tail is like the sort of the signature real estate on the plane, and they're forcing British Airways to replace it with their localized mark. And it's sort of interesting because it also says, like, okay, we're working together. Like, you know, we're prepared to literally just replace out. It's not a new design. It's just, it's like an example of like, okay, we're working together. So I don't know. I think of it as a good thing, but I imagine behind the scenes, it was probably a pretty brutal discussion.
It probably was, yeah.
Just because airline people behind the scenes, it's pretty hardcore. It's real, and so, but again, that's to me the sort of the romance of air travel is that there are these frontiersmen, these larger than life business people with huge egos, wrestling with governments. I mean, look at Pan American and the influence that airline had.
They had there's like so many things alive today that are like, oh, Pan American was the greatest. Like, it's kind of sad that they were, they're out.
A real sad story. I mean, their legacy will live on.
It will.
But just in terms of like the role that airlines played in advancing technology, advancing people, like physically and symbolically, like opening up trade corridors, bringing culture to parts of the world that had never seen. This is again part of the romance of the jet age, and so this example that you're citing again is sort of like, it's a little bit of that, the last semblances of like statements and moments where you see like the impact of governments and cultures wrestling with private industry like an airline.
Yeah.
And they're not good bedfellows, clearly. Like it's
it's
awkward. But again, that's the humanity. It's like, okay, well, we're still going to make it happen because.
And they made it come together. It's not like it's like horrendous. It's just not like it's not the best, but they made it work. They made their whatever they had to follow, they did it.
Yeah, I'm going to keep this one in my back. I'm going to show Peter this like this. He has no idea. Like I didn't realize it was. I know there's British Caledonian, British Airways.
Yeah.
But British Asia, like what a obscure reference. I like it.
Yeah. So you brought up Pan Am, and I don't know how much you've dabbled in airport design, but Pan Am had a terminal in JFK called Pan Am Worldport, and they tore that down in 2013, and it was a major like uproar. And I wasn't an av geek when the uproar happened, but I was reading about it. And it's crazy that one airline can have an influence on an entire airport, and people that like love that airline's terminal even after the airline was gone. Like that's amazing.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, the architecture and air travel are synonymous. Like some of the most amazing structures in the world. Designed for airports. I mean, Saarinen, great example of the work he did for TWA.
Mm-hmm.
Worldport, I don't know who the architect was, although sure I could find out. But like, how sexy and gorgeous was that? Like, just I mean, not practical anymore, obviously, but that giant canopy and how the 707s would all park, and then you'd see people walking literal gangways, which is sort of reminiscent of when people would board the Clippers. They would have to sort of carefully step onto the floating plane on this little gangway. Like there was just the ceremony of boarding the plane, right? I mean, all of it. So I'm really thankful that TWA never got rid of the terminal at JFK. In fact, they did a really good job of making it into a hotel. And usually those ventures fail miserably because people don't understand and respect.
But I think TWA had that impact on like America because they were like I feel when people think of like a American airline, for people obviously in your generation, I think in my younger generation we think of United or American Airlines. But people like if you ask like someone who was alive during the era, like what is an American airline to you? They're going to describe elements of TWA for sure.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Continental, another big.
Yes.
Eastern Airlines, Granite.
I loved Eastern Airlines' chrome livery on the L1011s. I have a model of that, and I look at it every day, and I'm like, oh my God, it's beautiful.
Even the 727s were really
yes.
Big fan. But yeah, those were the workhorses. Those were the airlines.
They were.
And they were sort of innocuously, sort of like that was part of our fabric. And now they're like, these like shining, markers of the past. Like what? Like, but there was something about these airlines where there was this esteem. The typography was a good example of the esteem, like just the bold, solid weightiness of the type. There was nothing soft about it because the whole jet age at the time was charging forward, polluting the industry, and it was doing all these other things. But people were smoking in those planes, and it was just a nightmare. But there was so much going on that it's just all about like rolling forward, full throttle.
Mm-hmm.
That I think, is what I think about when I think about airlines like that then. And now airlines are, it's all about like politics of accessibility, environment, security. I mean, it's just a way more sobered environment for air travel. Even though it has its appeal, it's so not the same back in the day when it was like,
It's not.
You want another drink? And the flight attendants were stewardesses, and the ads were sexist, and no one cared. It was just like one big rolling, messy party. It was crazy. Like, but I don't know. That's gone.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, I've loved talking to you, and this conversation was so eye-opening. But I have one last question for you, and we'll call it a night. And I would look forward to talking to you again. But my last question for you is, as an artificial intelligence enthusiast myself, what are some ways we can leverage AI in the branding industry and designing?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm wrestling with AI right now. I think everybody is.
Everybody is, for sure.
I just, and I'm nervous, like I use it a lot. I use chat a lot, and it helps in some ways. I'm not sure exactly how to answer the question of AI as it relates to, here's what one thing that we do with AI, which I guess is great, but I'm going to sound like an old man now. So scary. My claim to any fame and my excitement for design is very much embedded in the craft. And the craft for me is something that requires time. Because time, fuels the iterative process. And so you can't get to there unless you start here. Like there's a cathartic nature to it. And so as a designer and as an artist, that is sort of that backdrop to how I do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I use a pencil. I just take a picture. I put the picture on a wall. I look at it. I make notes. That AI now is allowing people to supersede all of that. And so the design process is radically changing in that it's speeding up. And there are some things about, design that you need to spend time to do. So I don't know how, and then the realization of anything you can imagine with AI is it's as exciting as it is scary. But
and that's sort of like the ethical problem with AI, that like it kind of takes away the hard work that an artist put and the time, like you said, the time spent, and like artists take pride in their work because they had the blood, sweat, and tears.
Yes.
Right? But at the same time, if you think about it, right, it opens up opportunities to people who previously couldn't, right? You may have been a great artist, right? But some people may not have that ability. Or what about disabled people that don't have hands, or things like that? Yeah. AI allows them to do so much more now in the designing industry. So there's pros and cons to both sides.
Well, so I start with sort of my pain point as a point of view, but then I'm going to end on your comment, which I think is so interesting, and that's the part that I'm learning myself, which is, creativity comes in all shapes and sizes and forms.
Yeah.
And my ability to extract ideas through a process that takes time is one way to do it, and I don't think that's ever going to die. By the way,
it's not, for sure.
Well, but then, what about ideas that are alive and well, amazing ideas and concepts, where people are not necessarily trained in the craft of graphic design, or perhaps they're not able to because of a limitation they might have.
Right.
How can AI open up those doors, and what amazing ideas have we not even seen yet?
Yeah.
People who previously never really allowed to participate are suddenly being brought into the party, and it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. That's super cool.
Yeah.
So that part I like, and it's my job is to not be afraid, or not my job is to open doors, not close them.
Right.
When it comes to things that I don't know, like learn, push.
Yeah.
Peter Clark, my business partner, he he's great because he pushes me in ways, we push each other, but he's often reminding me of these things. And I think it's good that you're bringing it up as well, because whether you're older or younger, you have, respective to your lot in life, the same problem. Like, if you're young, look to the past and figure out what was happening then.
Right.
If you're older, look to the future. So I think the comment is important to recognize from both parts, but definitely your opinion on it, I think, is very sage for sure.
I mean, if you think about it, like, let me give you an example, right? I have a friend who's a high school student like me, obviously very busy because, high school is that way, but they had a really good idea for like a redesigning of, I believe it was, give me a second, Iberia. They had a really, I really liked their design. And so they weren't like, they don't have the time to go through the whole process, but he was able to alter the prompt of the digital AI art thing slightly so that he could really get what he envisioned. And it, obviously he didn't send it anywhere, it didn't happen, but you can see that sort of like you said, opening doors to people who don't have the time, or people who don't have the resources to, try a bunch of different colored pencils, right? But now they can just type it in, right? As long as they have something to type it in on, right?
Yeah.
And I see how some people may say that you're losing that creativity, but at the same time, there's a field of engineering called prompt engineering, which is how do you change prompts for AI to be able to get the results you want? And I sort of dabbled in that, and I saw that actually requires a lot of effort as well. So while I'm there's sides to both arguments, like you said, and I think it was great that you said that, it's never going to leave that we appreciate the time that, handcrafted work comes. But like you said, it's also important to sort of look to the future.
Yeah. I think if I was an educator, I would be looking for ways to create programs that recognize balance. So, it wasn't all about embracing the future, but rather, creating pockets where people were being forced or encouraged to explore the craft of design from a traditional perspective, but also, lean into things that are new. I think that's, when I use chat, I get a little nervous because
everyone does.
It's so fast, and it literally produces things that are so perfect sounding. And here's the problem. So I want to do a proposal. I get chat to do the proposal. Now, that's a lot of the proposals that you write. 80% of it is rote. It's kind of it's generic stuff. 10% of it or 20% of it is okay, you've got to really think, strategize, point of view. But if you just want to get the basics done and you give chat the information, it gives it to you in seconds. And then you don't read it. And not only do you not read it, I mean, I do read it, don't get me wrong, but I have to force myself to sit, and it's almost as if my body can't even sit still to read it. It's really interesting. I was telling Peter that I was I know I need to read it, but I tend to scan it really quickly. So I guess what I'm nervous about is that because it came to me so quickly, I'm actually adverse to spending the time to actually read it. That's just written stuff. And I'm a visual person, so my real interest is in visuals. But I just was wondering, does that have the same? Did that chilling effect happen in the same way visually? Is that boom? It just looks so perfect. It happens so fast. But are you inclined to explore?
Yeah.
Or where's the inclination to move? You have that problem in the traditional way because it just takes longer and you get tired. You're oh, I don't want to explore anymore. I'm done. So that's conversely the problem in the traditional realm. Whereas in the future side with AI, it's it happens so fast.
Yeah. That
you think you've used more time to explore, but sometimes there's this phenomenon of boom, that's perfect. It's exactly what I thought it would be. I'm done.
Yeah.
And it's but hold on, maybe there's something else. So I don't know. That's the nagging question that I wrestle with. In addition to the idea of try it, don't be afraid, dabble in it,
And
So
in
that's
some
where
way,
I'm at.
that resembles the aviation industry when it started, right? When we first had people flying on airlines, it was like, it's not going to be safe. What if it crashes, right? What if the engine shuts down? But at the same time, it's like, wow, I could get from point A to point B like so fast, and it would be luxury in the sky. Like I could be sipping champagne, sitting in a chair like 30,000 feet above the ground, right? So it's like you're playing with this ethical like dilemma, whether like, you know, yeah, I have to take a risk, but at the same time, like there is a rewarding side to it. And I think a lot of things embody that, but the aviation industry, like especially when it started.
I mean, if that's the case, what you're saying is true. We'd all still be flying in dirigibles. We'd all be in the Hindenburg still. So
yeah,
like, which by the way is another world that I'm fascinated by is airships, dirigibles, and all that. But I totally hear you, and I agree with you completely. Innovation and progress require putting one foot in front of the other, even if you have issues or you're a little bit like
doubtful.
You've got to keep going, and you've got to find the brilliance and the genius in these new ways.
Yeah,
even if they're not apparent. Especially from where I stand, I might even be looking at the negative, but from where you're standing, you just told me some stuff that's like, oh, I never thought about somebody who wasn't necessarily able to do graphics, or there was maybe disabled people. Like, oh my God, there's still great ideas there waiting to happen. Like, thank you, AI. Like,
yeah,
this is true.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for enlightening me. This conversation was amazing, and I enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much for being here. I will definitely ask you to come back one day. I would love to talk to you more. But let's call it a night, and thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and take care.
You too.
All right.
All right, everyone. There you have it. A big thank you to Edmond for taking the time to speak to me. I really enjoyed our insightful conversation. And thank you for listening. I hope you all learned something too. Please make sure to support the Aviation Files however you can. And don't forget to check out my Insta @TheAviationFiles for more fun and exciting aviation news. Until next time.